and you're very welcome. Fintan Dunn here for Irish First Mothers. And I suppose I should be disconsolate and dejected after what just happened in relation to the 30-year sealing of files, but I'm not, because that was a predictable outcome. And all the while we've been focused on bigger fish. And the bigger fish in this case is the Commission of Investigation report, which is due within a week after 6 long years of waiting. That wasn't necessary waiting. That was unnecessary. Because I remember when that came about, we were distraught that the commission had been set up. It didn't even have an international judge, which would have made it a decent commission. And as you know, it was just an excuse to buy them 6 years of delay before they would have to deal with these issues. So at least we saw the colour of their money in the Dáil yesterday, as Minister Roderick O'Gorman did his best to try and not look like he was now a bona fide member of Fine Gael, but in actual fact he de facto is. Now, a lot of the stuff you saw going on was also prompted by Labour people in the adoption rights arena and academics wanting to embarrass him, Greens being a political enemy. And so all of that, you see, what happened yesterday wasn't the 30-year sealing of the files. That was inevitable from the Commission of Investigations Act 2004, under which this was all set up in the first place. So that was written, baked into the cake from the beginning. It was always going to be the case they were going to do that. What they were also at, though, yesterday was setting TUSLA up as the arbiter of all things to do with these files, so as that everybody in the future will have to go through TUSLA to get access to their own information. Of course, that's a travesty, because the information should be, as is in the case in the state of Victoria in Australia, that once you're 18 years of age, you get everything automatically in the post. It should be like that for survivors. They should have and do have automatic rights of access. We will gain those rights of access as part of the broader struggle for justice. This was a predictable move by them, and this is an corruption, essentially. TUSLA is the Department of Health, except it's privatised, if you like. It's semi-state, semi-sector, and semi-corrupt, as we all know. And as is the entire structure, this is now top-heavy, bureaucratic goons trying to set themselves up and put themselves between you and the records, the vital records, which are the records of your lives. So all of that predictable. So why amn't I disappointed that it went through? Because, as I say, that was expectable. And because it brought and has brought an international focus on these issues, the BBC is now reporting Roderick O'Gorman's regret that he failed to communicate properly with the survivors. I don't think he did. I think he communicated his complete contempt for them very adequately. I don't think he's anything to apologise for. We know exactly where you stand now. And I think it's to our advantage that a week before the Commission report comes out, we and the world now know where Roderick O'Gorman stands, and now know where this government stands, and now know what we're dealing with, which is yet another small party has now joined in to collude with the two parties who have been determined that you will not get truth, nor justice, nor redress in this issue. But I'm not disappointed, because even as that was going down, we were members of Irish First Mothers outside the Dáil, and we were talking about issues, vital issues of interest to the mothers, and we were getting a lot of success with that. And here you see the actual mothers. I much prefer you to hear from the mothers, and I'd like to thank Alison O'Reilly for her Stay With Me series, where she lets you hear from these mothers. I don't mind speaking on political and legal issues, but otherwise I wasn't in a home. I didn't have a baby. I'm only useful to you as a legal and political Rottweiler. And so I'll confine myself to talking about that kind of stuff. But as I say, survivors were out at the convention centre at the Dáil and gaining support inside the chamber, with Catherine Connolly TD describing what has been going on over the last 6 years as ongoing abuse of survivors, which it is. So we weren't just there for the good of our health. We were there with this mother and baby inquiry, the case for genocide prosecutions. Because that's the context of this. That's what will get you your files back, is the context that actually, as Cathy McMahon said in the Dáil in a committee, she said, these are not your records. These are our evidence of the crimes committed against us. And that's why they want to take that evidence of crime and hide it away. And what is the crime? The crime is the crime of genocide. Now, that crime was reported by the Irish media on the 5th of April, I think, in 2017, when Pat Kenny's nationally broadcasted radio programme on News Talk started off the week on a Monday morning with the news that Irish First Mothers had filed genocide charges against the Attorney General. That was the last ever mention of that issue on Irish media. And even later that day, when Cathy McMahon expressly asked Claire Byrne on the Claire Byrne Show to allow her to speak about the genocide issue when the camera came to her, Claire Byrne merely used her for her personal testimony and moved on without allowing Cathy to comment, or without even commenting herself on the fact that Irish First Mothers had filed genocide charges against the Attorney General. Let me show you more on that. Here's a copy of the letter which we sent to the Attorney General with formal genocide charges versus the Irish state, religious institutions and persons. And just in case the Attorney General wasn't fully up to speed on things, we just gave a couple of introductory paragraphs there, pointing out in the second one there that national authorities bear the primary responsibility in the first instance to investigate and prosecute those most responsible for the commission of mass crimes. See, you might have thought that the International Criminal Court, that's where you take dictators and stuff who've committed genocide in the third world and all this stuff. Yeah, well, it is, but the only reason you take them to the International Criminal Court is because they won't prosecute back at home. You see, because they have a corrupt judiciary who won't prosecute the crime of genocide domestically at home. Of course, that cannot apply in a Western democracy in Europe under the European Convention of Human Rights, can it? I mean, that can't be allowed. Genocide can't be allowed to go without even being investigated in a European country, can it? Of course it can't. And that's precisely the point we were making to the Attorney General when we wrote on the 4th of April 2017. We said, thank you for your reply of the 22nd of March, where they told us, don't know why you're talking to us, because you should be talking to the Commission of Investigation. And to our March 5th communication, which when we wrote to them initially saying, I tell you what, the government just admitted mass graves in Tuam. Sounds like genocide to us. We'll be back with more. And they wrote back, said, don't know why you're talking to us. Why don't you talk to the Commission of Investigation about that? Well, we said, because it's not the Commission of Investigation that has the responsibility to discharge a legal responsibility in respect to genocide under the International Criminal Court Act. It's you, Attorney General, who has that responsibility. So that's why we're now writing to you, charging you formally with your responsibility to do your duty. And that duty, as we pointed out to members of the Oireachtas in our lobbying outside the gates, that duty is a duty to investigate this properly. And here's what we were asking them to raise on the floor of the Oireachtas. Dear member of the Oireachtas, please ask the Attorney General to now give the Director of Public Prosecutions leave to consider prosecutions under the genocide provisions of the International Criminal Court Act. Because we think we have got evidence of that. And we charge the state with having committed genocide because it says in the Act, believe it or not, this is an act in Irish law, that forcibly transferring children of the group to another group is one of the signatures of genocide. It's in Section 7.3, Article 2E. And we quoted to the Attorney General Catherine McGuinness, former Irish Supreme Court judge, who sat on the board of the Irish Adoption Authority. and who, in her own words, had quite a close view of these matters of adoptions, and who in April 2015 made this public comment. And now I'd like you to listen to the public comments of a Supreme Court judge of Ireland. Now bear in mind that if these people, which is the mothers in the homes, were being picked on a religious basis, and if they were having their children forcibly transferred away from them, then that was a mass crime of genocide. Right? Were they been forcibly transferred? Let's have a little listen to Catherine McGuinness on whether they were consenting. Forced transfer would mean there's no consent. Let's listen to Catherine McGuinness describe the consent and ask ourselves, is she confident in the consent she's describing here, or is she stumbling over her words because she can't possibly be confident?
So what was your experience of things like that at that time?
Well, certainly the board itself used to try to, do the very best they could to see that what was then called the natural mother, the biological mother, had been signed up to all the correct forms and so on, that had the consent. You had a consent to place for when the child was placed with the adoptive parents or the prospective adoptive parents.
Wow. She nearly fell over trying to say all that, didn't she? Naturally, the board did the best they could to make sure the mother had signed up all the necessary forms so we could take the baby off her. Paraphrasing. I didn't hear anything in there about realizing that actually there wasn't true consent. And let's listen to some more of what she had to say back in 2015 on the 10th of June on the Ray D'Arcy show.
And then you had a further consent at a later stage, which was described as a final consent, but actually wasn't all that final, because there were quite a number of cases in the High Court where mothers came back and challenged the adoption, and some of them won and some of them lost. In fact, the most famous one was called G and on board the Ctala in 1980, and in that case the child was in fact returned to the biological mother. But so
in other words, people would have to go into court to try and get their own children back after having been put through these, and presumably the learned justices in those cases gave them back their children because they determined that it wasn't legal what had just happened. Well, we're saying that 95% or more of it wasn't legal. And we pointed that out to the Attorney General. Let's listen to some more of what she had to say.
There are cases like that.
But where were ye in relation to the places like the outside Rossgrey, Shannon Ross, was it? That was called, I think. Yes. That was the name of the place, yeah.
Where were we? Well, we didn't actually go there.
Did you realise what was going on? But did you realise what was going on?
We wouldn't have realised that it was exactly what was going on. On the other hand, I must...
We wouldn't have realised exactly what was going on. Not good enough. There's tens of thousands of women have had their babies torn away from them, and we wouldn't have realised exactly what was going on. Doesn't quite cut it. So it's on that basis that we have concerns that we addressed with the Attorney General when we said we quote Catherine McGuinness. And we quote that as evidence of forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. They were, shall we say, encouraged to place their children for adoption. Yeah, like I could encourage you with a bunch of my friends to sign your business over to me, as long as we had about an hour together in the garden shed where we could beat the crap out of you. That'll encourage you. So how much different was it what was done to mothers? And we went on to cite not just Judge McGuinness, but also we cited Paddy Cooney, a Fine Gael Minister for Justice at the first Adoption Workers' Conference in 1974. When he said to that first ever Adoption Workers' Conference, I think we're all agreed that the consensus opinion in our society is to the effect that adoption is better for the illegitimate baby than to be cared for by its mother. We're calling an infant an illegitimate. No infant is ever illegitimate, and neither are or is the parent or parents of that infant illegitimate. But this is illegitimate, and we told the Attorney General that we cited Mr. Cooney's comments in the setting of the first state adoption conference as indicating state bias to dispense with our consent in pursuit of genocidal aims. Now here's where it gets down to the meat of it. We said traumatic injury, compounded by grief for our taken infants, rendered us incapacitated for the subsequent purpose of providing consent to adoption. We hadn't the capacity to give consent. How could we, after we had been put through those appalling procedures in the mother and baby homes that would impair anyone's consent? How is it that the learned judge, who presumably has plenty of brain cells between her two ears, was incapable of seeing that impaired consent was going on wholesale? She's sort of saying it in the audio now, but the question is, did she prevent genocide? It's one of the charges in the genocide legislation. One of the things you can be found guilty of is failure to prevent genocide. She would say, of course, absolutely, she didn't have knowledge. I'm saying I wish you were a bit more forthright in your comments when you get asked about it, because all of your comments are giving the impression that there is an issue with the consent. And we pointed out there's plenty of issues, and you don't hear this on RTE, you don't hear this, because this goes to the heart of it. You don't hear about the genocide, you don't hear about these problems with the consents to all those adoptions. It's not just there were some illegal adoptions, they were all illegal. Even had we sufficient agency and mental capacity, our valid consent would have required, for example, that our legal advisor would be retained and paid by us. Think that happened? Think that happened? You think the solicitor was actually paid for and retained by the mother, the young woman in these cases? No. But then who's the solicitor working for? Not the applicant. Would fairly determine our capacity. In other words, the legal representative working for you, hired by you, would be well able to stand up for you and say, I tell you what, my client hasn't got the capacity to consent. Did that happen? No. Would ensure we were not encumbered by duress. Very easy. Send everybody else out of the room and have a quiet conversation on your own without anybody else with the mother and discuss what she wants. Did that happen? No. And finally, would advise without bias. And of course, the cultural bias, as expressed by everybody, was that these women didn't deserve their babies, and even if they did, it was better for them to be taken away by and raised by other people. Something, if you tried to do that now, you would get arrested for, I think you'd agree. If you went into Hollis Street, took a baby, said, woman doesn't deserve to have that baby, I've got a perfect couple for that, you'd be arrested. This is the sort of stuff we were talking about to the Attorney General, of course, these being matters of law. So we said, in the main, such legal diligence was but a fantasy. It was a fantasy that these were legitimate consents. In every way they were impaired. They were what we called a mass fraud upon the adoption courts. So the transfer of the children was quasi-legal, relying on consents which were incapable, encumbered and uninformed, and which comprised a state-sanctioned mass fraud upon the adoption courts. And we charge that the Irish State Party is incontestably guilty of genocide and failure to prevent genocide, and potentially guilty of conspiracy to commit genocide. We'll see, we said to the Attorney General. It's up to you now to do your duty. That was what we'd said to the Attorney General. And you've heard some of the evidence there which we cited from Judge Catra McGuinness. So you see, this is the sort of stuff that nobody wants to talk about on television, because it really does go to the heart of it. And it would also bypass the current redress structures, etc. The reason they're ever able to tell everyone to get lost, whether it's industrial schools or anything else, is because it's usually too late under statute of limitations to bring cases against them. And then that means that they can just give you the two fingers and tell you to get lost and accept mere handouts. However, if this is the crime of genocide, then there is no statute of limitations. And anybody who was complicit in, failed to prevent, or otherwise, those charges are matters for the DBP, can face justice. Furthermore, those who committed these crimes structurally, institutionally, or individually can have their assets seized and used to compensate the victims. That was seen when genocide law was framed as an essential part of it. And it is. So let it not be, and we've no intention of letting it be, that this crime is committed without anybody daring to even say its name other than Pat Kenny for 10 minutes on the 5th of April 2017, before it disappears, never to be heard of again. I don't think it will, because we have circulated to members of the Dáil and Seanad this call and case for Baby Home's genocide prosecutions, and asking them to raise these issues in the Dáil on the record, and let's hold Ireland to account to its international obligations under genocide law. After all, this is why we signed up to this stuff. We all signed up to this stuff back in 1946 in the United Nations. Countries around the world enshrined genocide legislation in their own national parliamentary laws, because it was necessary to do that in order to stamp out something which was regarded as a vile occurrence in human history and something which should never be allowed to happen again, which is the crime of genocide. And so I'll tell you in conclusion why we're here, because that was signed in the United Nations, as I say. And that letter to the Attorney General in April 2017, after the admission by the government that there were in fact mass graves in Tuam from Irish First Mothers, that was inspired by a comment by Cathy, who some months earlier had turned to me in doing her own research and asked, is it genocide what they did? And having looked at the law and realised that it actually mentioned forced transfer of children, I had to agree with her. She was right, it was genocide. The day before Cathy passed away, she was at the gates of the United Nations, as it happens, because she passed away in Geneva. And the day before, she was at the very gates where the United Nations, the symbol of that opposition to genocide as a crime internationally, represents the best hope indeed for true justice, I believe, for those who've been affected by this crime here in Ireland. It was genocide. And let's let it be put up to them that it was genocide, and let's see how deep justice runs in this country or internationally. But we can't allow this to be dismissed as occasional lapses in the treatment of unmarried mothers, when it was, in fact, systematic removal from tens of thousands of women of their own children on an absolutely genocidal basis, having demeaned them with the description by the perpetrators of them as fallen women, a caste within, an outcast sect, in fact, within Catholicism or Christianity. And then having proceeded to do what they did based upon that generalization about them, which was a religious generalization. So let it be called what it is, genocide. And let's see, I do hope that we'll get support and get it onto the record of the Dáil and the Seanad, that a proper consideration of this as to whether it was, and if so, who needs to be held to account, should be done. Again, we call, and you can get this on the Voice of First Mothers on Facebook, just search for that. and look for the Genocide Prosecutions post, where you can get that text that you can send to your Member of Parliament asking them to ask the Attorney General, or even demand that the Attorney General now give leave to the DPP to consider prosecutions under the genocide provisions of the International Criminal Court Act 2006. And in the light of fairness, which we're all in favour of, aren't we? I also have to point out that Judge Catherine McGuinness may very well have plenty of good explanations for all the comments which she made, and that we can't in any way impugn her integrity as a result of her forthright comments that she has made in public and voluntarily. Nevertheless, they are in the public record. But again, it's not for me, you, or anybody else to judge this. It's for the Attorney General of Ireland to unleash the Director of Public Prosecutions, because she has a block on the Director's ability to investigate, and to give leave to the DPP, that the DPP should consider these matters in the common interest and for the common good. All right, we'll be back on more on that. And thank God the 6 long years where we've lost some wonderful people, including Joan McDermott just recently, rest in peace. Another who said to me, will we ever get justice? Unfortunately, not in time for you, Joan, but I know you're wishing us well in getting justice for all those of us who are still fighting for it. Thanks for joining me. Back with more soon. In the meantime, you get everything you need on Voice of Irish First Mothers, which is on Facebook, where you can follow the latest developments in the campaign for justice. Thanks very much.